My name is Piper, 33 years old and a corporate crisis manager who fixes disasters for a living. I moved far across the country without telling my family. For 12 months, nobody called me. Not a single text. Not until my younger sister needed a free babysitter. My mother ended up leaving 55 voicemail messages in one weekend calling me selfish. In return, I mailed back one single package. When they opened it in front of their wealthy friends, the entire family went no contact with each other. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who severely underestimated your worth. The Los Angeles sun was casting long shadows across the white marble countertops of my penthouse when the peace I had cultivated for a year was suddenly shattered. I was standing in my kitchen looking out over the sprawling city skyline holding a glass of iced water. My phone vibrated violently against the counter. The caller ID flashed a name I had actively avoided thinking about for exactly 365 days. Sienna, my younger sister, the indisputable golden child of our family. I stared at the screen as it buzzed. A part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. For the past year, my life in California had been a sanctuary. I had traded the suffocating humidity and relentless judgment of our Connecticut hometown for the freedom of the West Coast. No more walking on eggshells, no more being compared to Sienna. Just me, my demanding career, and a circle of friends who actually respected my boundaries. But curiosity won. I swiped the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I simply waited to see what she would say first. Piper, you need to listen to me right now. There was no greeting, no asking how I was doing after a year of complete silence. Just the sharp, panicked demand of a woman who was used to snapping her fingers and having everyone jump. Andre and I are hosting our 5th anniversary party this Friday. It is going to be a massive catered event for his law firm partners and our friends. It is strictly adults only. Our nanny just quit on us without any warning and I am freaking out. You have to fly back here by Thursday night to watch the kids. I took a slow sip of my water, letting the sheer audacity of her demand wash over me. She had not spoken to me since I packed my bags and drove away from our family estate, yet here she was treating me like a staff member on call. I am sorry, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. You want me to fly across the country on a Thursday to babysit your children so you can throw a party? Do not use that tone with me, Sienna snapped back instantly. Her breathing was heavy, echoing through the phone speaker. I am incredibly stressed out right now, and I do not have time for your attitude. I already checked the flight schedules online. There is an overnight flight from LAX, landing in New York on Friday morning. You can sleep on the plane. Do not give me any excuses about being too busy with work. That little glorified assistant job of yours can wait. Real family steps up when there is a crisis. A glorified assistant job. I felt a cold smile form on my lips. That was how my family viewed my position as a senior crisis director at one of the top corporate management firms in the country. While Sienna spent her days curating her perfectly aesthetic suburban lifestyle for social media, relying entirely on the money her husband Andre desperately tried to project they had, I was advising tech executives on how to navigate federal lawsuits. But in the eyes of my parents and my sister, I was just Piper. The plain, uninteresting older sister who existed only to be a convenient stepping stone for Sienna and her ambitions. I looked around my beautifully furnished penthouse paid for entirely by the success they dismissed so casually. I thought about the endless peace I had enjoyed without their constant demands. Sienna, I said calmly, leaning against the counter, I am not flying to Connecticut. I am not watching your kids. Have fun at your party. Before she could even scream, I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed end. The silence returned to my apartment, sweet and heavy. But deep down, knowing my family, I knew this was only the beginning of the storm. Less than 10 seconds later, my phone lit up again. It was a FaceTime call this time. I propped the phone against my espresso machine and hit accept, not bothering to hide the calm, unimpressed look on my face. Andre's face instantly filled the screen. He was wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit and a silk tie that I knew for an absolute fact he could not afford on his junior associate salary. Sienna was hovering right behind his shoulder, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, already playing the victim. "Who do you think you are, hanging up on your sister like that?" Andre barked, his voice booming through the small speaker. His tone was laced with that unbearable arrogance he always carried, the kind of unearned confidence of a man who thought passing the bar exam made him royalty. "You have been ignoring us for a year, living it up in California, while we are out here building a life, and the second we ask for one small favor, you act like a selfish brat. Grow up, Piper. We need you here by Thursday." I poured my iced water into the sink and leaned closer to the camera. "Selfish," I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue. That is a fascinating choice of words coming from the man whose wedding I financed against my will. Andre rolled his eyes dramatically, letting out a loud, patronizing sigh. "Oh my God, are we really doing this again? Are you seriously bringing up ancient history right now?" "It was 14 months ago, Andre," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "And I am bringing it up because you seem to have a severe case of amnesia regarding why I moved 2,400 miles away in the first place. You and Sienna went into my purse during Thanksgiving dinner, took my platinum credit card, and fraudulently charged exactly $40,250 to pay for your luxury wedding venue, the imported orchids, and that custom suit you are wearing right now." "That was not fraud," Andre snapped, adjusting his tie as if my words had physically ruffled his fake, pristine image. "You are being dramatic. It was an investment in our family. My partners were at that wedding. Half the senior attorneys at my firm were sitting at those tables. I had to project a certain image of success to secure my position. We had a verbal understanding that we would pay you back when my bonuses came in." "There was no verbal understanding," I shot back, my patience wearing dangerously thin. "You stole my financial information. You forged my electronic signature on the catering contract. The only reason you are not currently sitting in a jail cell for felony credit card fraud is because my mother fell to her knees hyperventilating in the driveway, threatening to end her own life if I called the police on her precious golden child just weeks before the wedding." Sienna pushed her way into the frame, her face red with indignant fury. "You make plenty of money, Piper. You did not even need that cash. You work for those soulless corporate billionaires, so what is 40 grand to you? It is pocket change. You should have been happy to help your little sister have her dream day. Instead, you packed up and ran away like a coward, and you did not even show up to watch me walk down the aisle. You embarrassed us in front of everyone." "I did not embarrass you," I said, staring directly into my sister's eyes. "You embarrassed yourselves. I paid off that $40,000 balance in a single billing cycle because I actually earn the money I spend. But the fact remains that you are thieves, and now you have the absolute nerve to call me, demand that I use my paid time off, buy a last-minute cross-country flight, and act as your unpaid nanny, so you can throw yet another party to impress people who do not actually care about you." "Listen to me very carefully," Andre interrupted, pointing a manicured finger at the camera. He was using his courtroom voice, now trying to intimidate me. "You are part of this family whether you like it or not. Family shows up. You owe us for abandoning Sienna on the most important day of her life. You will book that flight, you will be here on Thursday, and you will watch the children. If you do not, I promise you we will make sure everyone in our hometown knows exactly what kind of bitter, jealous person you really are." I looked at his pointing finger. I looked at Sienna's smug, entitled face, completely shielded by her husband's aggressive gaslighting. They genuinely believed they held all the power. They believed that because I had walked away quietly a year ago, I was weak. They had mistaken my desire for peace for an inability to fight back. "I do not owe you anything," I said softly. "And as for your threats, Andre, you might want to remember who actually owns the roof over your head." I reached forward and ended the FaceTime call. I did not block them yet. I wanted them to stew in their own rage. I knew exactly what would happen next. They would go crying to the one person who had always enabled their horrific behavior. Right on cue, less than 2 minutes later, my phone began to ring again. The caller ID flashed the name I was expecting. My mother. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I did not even get the chance to say hello before her sharp voice pierced through the receiver. "Piper, what on earth is wrong with you, my mother?" Beatrice demanded. Her voice was trembling with that familiar manufactured outrage she always used when she did not get her way. "I just got off the phone with Sienna. She is in tears. Andre is furious. You hung up on them. After everything this family has done for you, you cannot even do one simple favor for your own sister." "Mother, it is not a simple favor," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "They want me to drop my entire life, fly across the country on 2 days' notice and act as unpaid childcare so they can throw a party. I have a career. I have responsibilities here." "A career?" Beatrice scoffed loudly. "Please, Piper. Do not pretend that sitting behind a desk answering emails is more important than your own flesh and blood. Sienna has a real life. She has a husband. She has children. She has a perfect marriage that needs to be celebrated. What do you have? A fancy apartment and a lonely life. You should be honored they even asked you to be part of their special weekend." The sheer delusion in her words was staggering. A perfect marriage. That was how my mother chose to view Sienna and Andre. In her eyes, they were the ultimate success story, the picture-perfect family unit that she could brag about at her country club luncheons. It did not matter that they had stolen $40,000 from my accounts to pay for their extravagant wedding. All that mattered to Beatrice was the image they projected to the wealthy Connecticut society she so desperately wanted to impress. "Mother, I am not going to argue with you about this," I said firmly. "I am not flying back. They can hire a new nanny. They can ask one of their country club friends to watch the kids. I am not their backup plan." "You are a massive disappointment to me," Beatrice hissed, dropping all pretenses of trying to persuade me. Her voice turned cold and venomous. "You always have been. Ever since you were a child, you have been jealous of your sister. You could never stand the fact that she is beautiful, that she is charismatic, that she married a successful lawyer. You are doing this just to spite her because you cannot stand seeing her happy." I closed my eyes for a brief second, feeling a dull ache in my chest. Even at 33 years old, hearing my mother twist reality to make me the villain still stung. But the crisis manager inside me immediately took over, analyzing her words, not as a daughter, but as a professional facing a hostile negotiation. She was projecting. She was using emotional blackmail to force my compliance because logic and reason had utterly failed. "I am not jealous of Sienna," I stated calmly. "I just refuse to be used by her anymore." "You are not being used, you are being asked to support your family," Beatrice shouted back. "Andre has invited the senior partners from his firm. The entire neighborhood will be there. If you do not show up to help, it will reflect poorly on all of us. People will ask where you are. They will wonder why the older sister is not there supporting the family. You are going to embarrass us, Piper." "Tell them I am busy," I suggested simply. "Tell them I am working. It is the truth." "It is a selfish excuse," Beatrice countered instantly. "Listen to me, Piper. If you do not book a flight right now and show up on Thursday, you are going to deeply regret it. I will not have a daughter who turns her back on her sister in a time of need. If you ruin this weekend for Sienna and Andre, you can consider yourself cut out of this family. We will not call you. We will not visit you. You will be completely dead to us. Do you understand me?" She expected me to cry. She expected me to panic and beg for her forgiveness just like I had done when I was a teenager. That was her ultimate weapon, the threat of complete abandonment. But she did not realize that I had already spent the last 12 months building a life where her approval meant absolutely nothing to me. "I understand perfectly, Mother," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "I accept your terms. Goodbye." I pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the cool marble. The conversation was over. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. For a long moment I just stared at the back of my phone casing, watching the afternoon sunlight reflect off its surface. Growing up, that specific threat from my mother being cut off, being exiled from the family unit, was the ultimate weapon of terror. It was the emotional guillotine they held over my head whenever I dared to ask for basic respect. When I was a teenager, that threat would have sent me into a spiral of panic. I would have called back crying, apologizing for being difficult, promising to do whatever it took to smooth things over and keep the peace. I had spent 3 decades playing the designated shock absorber for their dysfunction. I was the reliable, invisible older sister who was expected to clean up Sienna's messes, absorb my mother's criticisms, and finance their delusions of grandeur. But standing in my Los Angeles penthouse, thousands of miles away from their toxic orbit, I felt something entirely different. I did not feel fear. I felt an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of liberation. The worst thing they could possibly threaten me with was exactly what I had been praying for. The phone against the marble countertop buzzed loudly, shattering the quiet. Then it buzzed again. And again. The rapid-fire vibration sounded like an angry hornet trapped under a glass. I did not pick it up, but I leaned over to read the preview notifications lighting up the lock screen. They were coming in fast, a desperate flurry of text messages proving that my mother's ultimatum had completely backfired. The first was from Beatrice, typed in aggressive all-capital letters. "How dare you hang up on me? You call me back right now, or I swear to God, Piper, I will ruin you." Immediately beneath it was a text from Andre trying to sound authoritative and legally intimidating. "Piper, you are making a massive mistake. You are legally obligated to repay the emotional distress you are causing your sister. I suggest you reconsider your stance before I take action." I actually let out a short, sharp laugh at that one. A junior lawyer threatening to sue his sister-in-law for emotional distress because she refused to babysit. It was pathetic. Then came Sienna firing off messages in rapid succession. "You are ruining my life. You are ruining my anniversary. You are the most toxic person I have ever met. I hate you." I watched the messages roll in one after another, creating a digital waterfall of entitlement and rage. They were spiraling. Narcissists always spiral when they realize they have lost control of their favorite scapegoat. By simply saying no and hanging up the phone, I had stripped away the only power they had over me. I refused to be their doormat anymore. I refused to be the unpaid nanny, the emergency ATM, or the emotional punching bag. I was a highly paid professional who spent her days strategizing for Fortune 500 companies, yet for years I had allowed these deeply insecure people to treat me like a subservient child. In my professional life, I handled hostile takeovers and public relations nightmares with cold precision. Today I was bringing the corporate crisis manager home. The boundary was set, and it was made of solid iron. I walked over to the built-in wine fridge tucked under my counter and pulled out a bottle of Pinot Noir. I took my time finding the corkscrew, peeling back the foil, and pulling the cork with a satisfying pop. I poured myself a generous glass, enjoying the deep ruby color of the wine against the pristine white of my kitchen. All the while, the phone on the counter continued its angry dance. They expected a fight. They expected me to text back, defending myself, explaining my busy schedule, or engaging in a bitter screaming match that would ultimately end in my submission. By giving them absolute silence, I was starving them of the drama they desperately craved. I picked up my glass of wine and finally picked up the phone. I did not unlock it to reply. I simply went into the settings and turned the screen face down again. Let them scream into the void. This was the moment I stopped being the victim in their twisted family narrative and started being the architect of my own peace. But as the text notifications suddenly stopped and the phone began to ring with an incoming call from Sienna, followed immediately by another from my mother, I realized they were changing their tactics. If I would not read their texts, they were going to force their voices into my life. The weekend siege had officially begun, and I was entirely ready for it. I carried my glass of Pinot Noir into the living room and sank into the deep cushions of my sofa. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the Los Angeles skyline was beginning to sparkle against the twilight sky. Inside, the relentless pinging of my phone provided a jarring soundtrack to the evening. The text messages had stopped, replaced by the distinct rhythmic chime of incoming voicemails. 1, then 3, then 7. They were piling up in the digital inbox, a desperate barrage of audio files. In the past, the mere sight of a missed call from my mother would induce a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Tonight, I simply felt a clinical curiosity. I reached over, unlocked the screen, and connected the audio to my apartment Bluetooth speakers. If they wanted to put on a theatrical performance, I was going to give them a high-fidelity venue. I pressed play on the very first message. A sharp, ragged intake of breath echoed through my living room, followed instantly by loud sobbing. It was Sienna. "Piper, I just cannot believe you are doing this to me," she wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured devastation. "It is my 5th anniversary. Do you know how hard I have worked to make this weekend perfect? The florist messed up the centerpieces, the caterer is charging us extra for the champagne tower, and now you are abandoning me. You know Andre needs this to go smoothly for his career. You are actively trying to sabotage my happiness because you are miserable alone in California. Call me back right now and tell me you booked the flight. Please, Piper." I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the complex flavors coat my tongue. The tears were entirely fake. I had grown up listening to that exact pitch of crying. It was the same weaponized sobbing Sienna used when she was 16 and crashed my car, managing to convince our parents that it was somehow my fault for leaving the keys on the kitchen counter. The next 4 voicemails were variations of the same hysterical theme. Sienna detailing her supposed suffering, describing how the children were acting out, and repeatedly framing my refusal to provide free babysitting as a deliberate malicious attack on her marriage. Then voicemail number 6 began. It was Beatrice. My mother did not yell. She used her quiet, breathless voice, the one she reserved for when she wanted to play the ultimate martyr. "Piper, it is your mother. I am sitting here in the dark, holding my chest. My blood pressure is through the roof. I cannot stop shaking. Where did I go wrong with you? I sacrificed my youth, my body, and my finances to give you girls a beautiful life in Connecticut. And this is how you repay me. By turning your back on your only sister when she is drowning in stress. You are breaking my heart, Piper. You really are." I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator to inspect my dinner options. I pulled out some fresh salmon and asparagus, listening as voicemails 7 through 12 played in the background. They alternated, tag-teaming the guilt trip. Sienna cried about how stressed Andre was. Beatrice cried about how she had failed as a mother to raise such a cold, unfeeling daughter. It was an impressive psychological assault. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. They wanted me to feel like a monster. They wanted the guilt to become so physically suffocating that I would book a red-eye flight just to make the emotional pressure stop. As I seasoned the salmon, voicemails 13, 14, and 15 transitioned into the social humiliation angle. Beatrice brought up her friends from the country club. "Do you know how humiliating this is going to be for me?" she whimpered into the phone. "I already told Mrs. Gable and the entire tennis committee that you were flying in to help with the kids. What am I supposed to tell them now? That my oldest daughter hates her family, that she is too selfish to show up. You are making us look completely dysfunctional in front of the entire neighborhood." I slid the baking sheet into the oven and set the timer. In my line of work, dealing with corporate public relations disasters, I called this phase the sympathy offensive. When a hostile party realizes that direct intimidation has failed, they pivot to profound victimhood. They try to convince you that your boundaries are an act of unprovoked violence against them. It was a textbook narcissistic response. I walked back to the living room and picked up my glass of wine. The guilt trip was exhausting to listen to, but it did not leave a single scratch on my conscience. I knew they were just warming up. The tears were failing, and soon the manufactured sadness would inevitably curdle back into pure, unfiltered rage. Right on schedule, voicemail 16 delivered the exact tonal shift I had been waiting for. The weeping was gone. When Sienna spoke, her voice was a sharp, venomous hiss that echoed through the apartment speakers. "You are a cold, dead-inside bitch," she snarled. "You think you are so much better than us because you live in a high-rise and wear designer suits. You are nothing. You are a miserable, lonely spinster, and no one will ever love you. Have fun dying alone with your bank account, Piper." I flipped the salmon in the oven, my expression completely unchanged. There it was. The mask had completely slipped. Voicemails 17 through 20 were rapid-fire attacks from Andre. He dropped the pseudo-legal jargon. and resorted to pure, unfiltered insults, calling me a parasite and a jealous failure. He threatened to fly to Los Angeles himself and physically drag me onto a plane. It was an empty, laughable threat, but it demonstrated exactly how unhinged they were becoming when deprived of their usual control. By voicemail 25, Beatrice had returned to the microphone and she was going nuclear. "I am done asking nicely, Piper," she screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "You have disrespected me for the absolute last time. If you do not call me back in 5 minutes, I am going to make sure everyone in our extended family knows exactly what a terrible daughter you are. I will ruin your reputation. I will call your boss. I will call your company human resources department and tell them you are mentally unstable and abusive to your family." The threat to my career was the exact moment I realized this had escalated from a standard family temper tantrum into a direct liability issue. My phone buzzed in my hand, no longer a voicemail, but a flurry of text notifications. Beatrice had made good on her first threat. I looked at the screen and saw I had been added to a massive group chat titled The Family Circle. It included both sets of grandparents, 4 aunts, 3 uncles, and a handful of older cousins I had not spoken to in years. The notifications began pouring in like a digital avalanche. Aunt Brenda was the first to strike. "Piper, I am absolutely disgusted by your behavior. Your mother is in tears. How can you be so incredibly selfish?" Uncle David followed immediately after. "We raised you to have family values. You need to apologize to Sienna and Andre and book a flight tonight. You owe your parents everything. You are a disgrace." Then came the cousins, eager to score points with the family matriarch. Cousin Jason chimed in with aggressive typing. "You are toxic, Piper. You need serious therapy. You are purposely ruining a beautiful anniversary because you cannot stand seeing other people happy." The messages stacked up, dozens of them, creating a chorus of collective abuse. They had only heard one highly manipulated side of the story, but that was all they needed. In our family ecosystem, truth did not matter at all. Blind loyalty to the golden child was the only currency that counted. If this had happened 5 years ago, the sheer weight of this collective rejection would have crushed my spirit. I would have felt sick to my stomach, consumed by guilt. But today, standing in my quiet kitchen, the crisis manager in me simply went to work. When dealing with a hostile corporate smear campaign, the first rule of crisis management is to secure the evidence before the opposition realizes their mistakes and deletes the trail. I walked over to my home office desk, opened my laptop, and connected my phone via a secure cable. I bypassed the standard backup protocols and opened a dedicated forensic capture software I used for work. I began meticulously taking high-resolution screenshots of every single text message in the group chat, making sure the timestamps and phone numbers were clearly visible. I saved the audio files of all 30 voicemails, categorizing them by speaker and level of aggression. I created a secure folder on my encrypted cloud drive titled Connecticut Liabilities. Every threat, every insult, every piece of emotional blackmail was documented, organized, and backed up in 3 separate locations. They thought they were intimidating me. They thought bringing in the extended family to bully me into submission would break my resolve. They had no idea they were simply handing me a meticulously documented trail of their own abusive behavior. The group chat continued to buzz with fresh insults, but I did not engage. I did not defend myself. I did not point out that Andre and Sienna were thieves. Responding to a smear campaign only gives it oxygen. Instead, I let them keep typing. I let them put all of their venom in writing. They were building their own trap, and I was more than happy to let them keep digging the hole. The clock on my oven flashed 9 p.m. My salmon was perfectly cooked. I plated my dinner, poured a second glass of Pinot Noir, and sat down at my kitchen island. The digital counter on my voicemail inbox now read 31. The onslaught had evolved once again. They had passed through the stages of panic, guilt, and rage, and had now firmly landed in the territory of drunken exhaustion. It was Friday night on the East Coast, pushing midnight, and it was painfully obvious that Sienna and Andre had opened a few bottles of wine to cope with their perceived trauma. Voicemails 31 through 40 were a masterclass in slurred entitlement. Sienna left a rambling 5-minute message where she alternated between crying about a ruined floral arrangement and viciously insulting my physical appearance. She accused me of being secretly in love with Andre, a delusion so absurd I actually choked on my asparagus. Beatrice chimed in around voicemail 42, her voice sounding thick and heavy with sleep aids, or perhaps her own vodka tonic. She whispered into the phone that I had broken the family chain and that she was rewriting her will first thing on Monday morning to leave everything to Sienna. It was a hollow threat, considering my father Jeffrey managed all their finances and they were practically drowning in debt just keeping up appearances. By the time I finished my dinner, the group chat had mercifully gone silent. The aunts and cousins had presumably gone to bed satisfied that they had properly defended the family honor. But the voicemails kept coming. 46, 48, 50. I washed my plate and wiped down the marble counters, keeping one ear on the Bluetooth speaker. Andre took over the microphone for the final stretch. His polished courtroom voice was completely gone, replaced by the aggressive, sloppy drawl of a man who had consumed far too much expensive scotch. In voicemail 52, he threatened to fly to Los Angeles and have me physically served with papers for emotional damages. In voicemail 53, he demanded I wire them $10,000 to cover the inconvenience of hiring a last-minute nanny. Then came voicemail 54. It was exactly 2 minutes and 14 seconds long, and it changed the entire trajectory of my life. The audio started with the sound of ice clinking against glass. I heard Sienna crying softly in the background. Then Andre spoke, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. "You know what, Piper?" he snarled, stumbling over a few syllables. "Stay in California. Stay in your sad, lonely little apartment. We do not need you. We do not need your help, and we definitely do not need your money. You think you hold all the cards because you paid off our wedding, but you are nothing. Sienna and I are making moves you cannot even comprehend. In fact, we are selling this house next month. That is right. We are listing the estate. The market is hot, and the equity is going straight into funding my own private law firm. I am making partner on my own terms. So keep your miles. Keep your attitude. We are going to be multimillionaires by Christmas, and you are not getting a single dime." The message clicked off. Voicemail 55 immediately followed, just 10 seconds of Sienna hiccuping and yelling that I was a loser before the line went dead. I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen. The sponge in my hand dripped soapy water onto the pristine floor, but I did not notice. I replayed voicemail 54. I listened to Andre lay out his grand master plan with arrogant certainty. "We are selling this house next month." A cold, dangerous smile slowly spread across my face. My heart beat with a steady, clinical rhythm. Andre, the brilliant lawyer who loved to flaunt his intelligence, had just made the most spectacular miscalculation of his life. He and Sienna were living in a stunning 4-bedroom colonial house in one of the most exclusive zip codes in Connecticut. They hosted dinner parties there. They bragged about the custom kitchen renovations. They told everyone in their country club circle that Beatrice and Jeffrey had purchased the home as a generous wedding gift to help them start their perfect family. But that was a carefully constructed lie to protect Andre's fragile ego. My parents did not have the cash for that house. Sienna certainly did not have the credit. 4 years ago, when Sienna was pregnant with her first child and crying about raising a baby in a cramped apartment, I was the one who quietly stepped in. I paid the massive down payment. I secured the mortgage under my pristine credit score. My name, and my name alone, was on the deed to that property. I legally owned the roof over their heads. And now they were plotting to sell my property to fund his law firm. The situation had just escalated from a toxic family dispute to a conspiracy to commit federal real estate fraud. I dropped the soapy sponge into the sink and dried my hands on a towel. My mind was already racing miles ahead, operating with the cold precision I used when a corporate client called me at 3 in the morning to say they were about to be indicted. I walked briskly into my home office and sat down at my glass desk. The glow of the monitor illuminated the dark room as I woke my computer. I opened a highly encrypted folder labeled Real Estate Assets and clicked on a subfolder designated for the Connecticut property. 4 years ago, Sienna had called me in hysterics. She was pregnant with her first child, living in a cramped apartment, and Andre had just failed the bar exam again. My mother Beatrice swooped in to manage the crisis. She arranged a private lunch at an upscale bistro and spent 2 hours crying. She begged me to help my sister. Beatrice claimed she and my father were locked up in illiquid investments and could not secure a mortgage. She pleaded with me to use my spotless credit score and substantial savings to secure a home. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement until Andre passed the bar and started making real money. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wired a massive 20% down payment directly to the escrow account. I signed the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. I paid the property taxes. But the moment the keys were handed over, the narrative abruptly shifted. Beatrice hosted a lavish housewarming party and stood in the center of the custom kitchen, loudly proclaiming to her country club friends that she and Jeffrey had purchased the estate as a surprise gift for their precious Sienna. They completely erased my financial contribution. When I confronted my mother about the lie, she brushed it off, claiming it would humiliate Andre if their high society friends knew his sister-in-law bought his house. I swallowed my pride and kept quiet. I opened the digital copy of the deed. There it was, displayed in stark black and white pixels, my full legal name. There was no mention of Sienna. There was no mention of Andre. The property belonged entirely to me. Next, I opened the banking statements. Every single month for the past 48 months, the mortgage payment was automatically deducted from my personal checking account. Andre and Sienna occasionally sent me partial payments they called rent, but they were consistently late and frequently short. I was heavily subsidizing their extravagant lifestyle while they publicly played the role of wealthy suburbanites. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and stared at the ceiling. How on earth did Andre think he could sell a house that was not legally his? He was arrogant, but he was not entirely stupid. He worked in a law firm. He knew exactly how property transfers worked. The title search would immediately flag my name as the sole owner. The only way he could list that house, accept an offer, and close a sale was if he forged my signature on the listing agreement and the final closing documents. Or perhaps he was planning to use his legal background to file a fraudulent quitclaim deed, transferring the ownership from my name to his without my knowledge. A chilling realization washed over me. This was why they were so incredibly desperate to get me to fly back to Connecticut this weekend. The anniversary party was just a convenient cover story. They needed me in the state. They needed me physically present in their house so they could pressure me, manipulate me, or trick me into signing legal documents disguised as something else. Perhaps they were going to bury a property transfer form in a stack of party vendor contracts. Or worse, they needed me there so they could steal my notary stamp to legitimize their forged signatures. They did not want a babysitter. They wanted a victim. The 55 voicemails, the hysterical crying, the group chat harassment, it was all a highly coordinated campaign to force me into a room where they could financially corner me. Andre wanted his private law firm, and he was perfectly willing to commit federal real estate fraud to get the capital. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with intense, razor-sharp clarity. They thought they were playing a simple game of emotional manipulation with an obedient daughter. They had no idea they had just triggered a full-scale corporate investigation. I reached for my phone immediately, completely ready to make my absolute first major strategic countermove. I pulled out my phone and immediately opened my contacts app. It was almost 10 p.m. in Los Angeles, which meant it was approaching 1 in the morning in Connecticut. But the people I needed to reach did not operate on standard business hours. When you work in high-level crisis management, your most valuable assets are the fixers you keep on retainer. People who can make problems disappear, or in this case bring them entirely to light with devastating accuracy. I scrolled past the names of corporate lawyers and PR executives until I found the contact I needed. Marcus was a former IRS investigator who had transitioned into private forensic accounting. He was brilliant, ruthless, and could track a hidden wire transfer through a dozen offshore shell companies before he finished his morning coffee. I hit the call button and pressed the phone to my ear. He picked up on the second ring. "Piper," he said, his voice raspy and alert. "It is late. Who is getting indicted tomorrow?" "No indictments yet, Marcus," I replied, walking over to my floor to ceiling windows and looking out at the city lights. "But I have a personal matter that requires an immediate and highly confidential financial sweep. I need you to pull the banking records, credit reports, and tax filings for my sister Sienna and her husband Andre. I also need you to look into my parents, Beatrice and Jeffrey. Specifically, I need to know the exact state of their liquid assets and their debt-to-income ratio." Marcus let out a low whistle. "A full family sweep. That is aggressive even for you. What is the objective here?" "The objective is to establish motive for attempted real estate fraud," I stated plainly. "Andre is a junior attorney. He just left me a voicemail stating his intention to sell a house next month to fund a private law firm. The problem is that house belongs entirely to me. I suspect he is heavily leveraged and desperate enough to attempt a forged property transfer or a fraudulent quitclaim deed. I need to know exactly how underwater he is, and I need to know if my parents are complicit in funding his lifestyle. Send me their full legal names, dates of birth, and any known banking institutions they use." Marcus said, the sound of a keyboard clacking already audible in the background. "I will have a preliminary financial profile for you by tomorrow afternoon. But Piper, if he is a lawyer and he is planning fraud, he might be sloppy with his money, but he will be careful with his paper trail. You are going to need more than just bank statements to prove intent before he actually files the forged documents." I know, I said, a grim determination settling over me. "Which is why you are only half of the strategy. I will send you the details right now. Thanks, Marcus." I ended the call and immediately dialed a second number. This one belonged to Elena. She was a private investigator I frequently hired when corporate clients suspected an executive was leaking trade secrets to competitors. Elena was practically a ghost. She could uncover a person's deepest, darkest secrets without ever leaving a digital footprint. Elena answered with a simple yes. "I need a deep dive on a junior attorney in Connecticut named Andre," I said, not wasting any time with pleasantries. "I need his daily movements, his cell phone records, and his email logs for the past 6 months. I want to know who he talks to, where he goes when he is not at the firm, and who he is doing business with. I also need a background check on my mother, Beatrice, and my father, Jeffrey. I want to know if there are any hidden accounts, secret properties, or undisclosed liabilities." Elena was silent for a moment. "This sounds personal, Piper. You usually only call me for corporate espionage. It is highly personal," I confirmed. "They are trying to steal a massive asset from me. I need leverage. I need to know everything they are hiding behind their perfect suburban facade. Andre likes to project wealth and power. I want to know exactly what is propping up that illusion, and I want the receipts to tear it down." "Consider it done," Elena said smoothly. "I have a contact at a data brokerage firm who owes me a favor. I will start pulling his digital footprint tonight. If he has secrets, I will find them. Expect a secure file drop within 48 hours. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I stood in the quiet of my penthouse, the adrenaline still thrumming through my veins. Going no contact was the easy way out. It was what victims did when they were too tired to fight back. But I was not a victim anymore. I was a crisis manager, and my family had just become my most hostile client. They wanted to play games with my property. They wanted to use my financial stability to fund their delusions. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. By the time this weekend was over, they were going to realize that pushing me was the biggest mistake they had ever made. I was going to tear their perfect image apart piece by meticulously documented piece. Thursday afternoon arrived with the low hum of Los Angeles traffic outside my window. I had taken the day off from the firm, sitting at my dining table with a fresh pot of coffee and my laptop. At exactly 2 o'clock, an encrypted email hit my inbox. The sender was Marcus. The subject line was simply a string of alphanumeric characters, our standard protocol for highly sensitive financial drops. I entered the decryption key, took a deep breath, and opened the attached dossier. What I saw over the next 2 hours was a masterclass in suburban financial ruin. I knew my family liked to project a certain level of country club wealth, but the reality was a terrifying house of cards completely ready to collapse. I started with my parents. Beatrice and Jeffrey were bleeding cash from every conceivable artery. Their primary residence, the sprawling estate they had bragged about paying off a decade ago, had been secretly remortgaged 3 times. They had completely drained their retirement accounts. My mother was floating her designer wardrobe and weekly tennis club luncheons on 5 different high-yield credit cards, all of which were hovering dangerously close to their maximum limits. They were entirely broke, living month to month on a delicate web of minimum payments and aggressively rolled over debt. But the most shocking revelation was not their lack of funds. It was where the remaining money had actually gone. I scrolled down to the cross-referenced transaction logs Marcus had compiled. He had highlighted a persistent, deeply parasitic pattern of wire transfers moving from my parents' joint checking account directly into Andre and Sienna's accounts. It was not just a few $100s here and there, it was a systematic siphoning of wealth. Over the past 4 years, Andre had manipulated my father into giving him nearly $80,000 in undocumented personal loans. The spreadsheet detailed every single transaction with terrifying precision. When Andre failed the bar exam for the second time, my parents wired him $10,000 for a supposed luxury study retreat. When Sienna wanted a new imported luxury vehicle to match the other wealthy mothers at the private preschool, my father quietly transferred $15,000 to cover the hefty down payment. But the most aggressive financial bleeding came directly from Andre himself. Marcus had uncovered that Andre possessed a secret credit card under his own name completely separate from Sienna. And for the past 18 months, my father had been quietly paying off the balance every single month without fail. I clicked on the itemized statements for Andre's secret card. The charges were sickening. He was not buying diapers or paying utility bills. He was expensing high-end steakhouses, booking luxury hotel rooms in neighboring cities, and purchasing expensive jewelry from boutique stores that Sienna had never worn. Andre was not a successful, high-powered attorney. He was an underpaid junior associate who was actively draining his in-laws dry to fund a completely separate, extravagant lifestyle. They were paying for a mirage of prosperity. I leaned back in my chair, the blue glow of the spreadsheet illuminating my face. The puzzle pieces were snapping together with terrifying clarity. Andre was not just arrogant, he was completely trapped. My parents were finally tapped out. They had no more equity left to borrow against. They had no more cash to fund his endless delusions. The gravy train had violently derailed, and Andre's secret spending habits required a massive immediate influx of fresh capital. That was exactly why they needed to sell my house. It was not merely an ambition to start his own private law practice like he claimed on the voicemail. It was absolute financial survival. Andre desperately needed a multi-million-dollar payout to cover his tracks, pay off his secret debts, and maintain the grand illusion of success before his entire life imploded in front of the entire neighborhood. And my mother, deeply terrified of the severe social humiliation that would surely come if her perfect golden child's marriage publicly collapsed, was actively helping him figure out how to steal my property. They were all cornered animals, and cornered animals were highly dangerous. They had spent the entire weekend trying to break me emotionally, hoping I would fly back and be too thoroughly exhausted to notice what they were doing with the legal paperwork. I looked down at the very bottom of Marcus's report. He had added a small, urgent note highlighted in red. Piper, they have successfully scheduled a private meeting with a local real estate broker for next Monday morning. They are definitely moving fast. I closed the spreadsheet instantly. The time for merely gathering financial intelligence was completely over. It was officially time to start forging my actual weapons now. I picked up my phone again, shifting my focus from forensic accounting to pure legal offense. If Andre wanted to play lawyer, I was going to introduce him to a real one. I needed a Connecticut-based attorney who specialized in high-conflict real estate litigation. Not just any lawyer, but a bulldog. Someone who did not care about family dynamics, emotional pleas, or suburban social standing. I opened my professional directory and found the direct cell number for Warren Mitchell. Warren was a notoriously ruthless litigator I had previously retained to evict a hostile corporate tenant from a commercial high-rise in downtown Los Angeles. He was expensive cold, and entirely devoid of empathy, which made him absolutely perfect for this specific job. I dialed the number. Warren answered with his signature brusque tone, skipping any form of standard greeting. "Mitchell," he barked. "Warren." "It is Piper," I said, matching his clinical energy. "I have an emergency residential property dispute in Fairfield County. I need aggressive, immediate action, and I am bypassing your firm's standard retainer protocol. I need legal documents drafted tonight." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the sound of a heavy leather chair creaking. "You have my full attention, Piper," he replied, his voice dropping into a sharp professional cadence. "Who are we throwing out into the cold?" "My sister and her husband," I stated plainly. "They are currently residing in a luxury property where I hold the sole deed and the mortgage. I just uncovered credible intelligence that he is attempting to illegally list the estate for sale this coming Monday to cover massive undisclosed debts." Warren let out a sharp, amused breath. "Attempting to sell a house he does not own. That is incredibly stupid. Is he completely insane or just dangerously arrogant?" "He is a junior attorney," I replied dryly, "which means he genuinely thinks he is the smartest person in any room he walks into. He believes he can manipulate the paperwork or forge my signature because he views me as a compliant, weak family member. I need you to completely dismantle that delusion by tomorrow morning. I want a legally binding 30-day notice to vacate drafted immediately. And I want a cease and desist order explicitly prohibiting him from contacting any real estate broker, listing agent, or title company regarding my property." "Let us make it absolutely bulletproof," Warren said, the sound of his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard echoing through the receiver. "I am pulling the county tax records right now. Yes, I see it. You are the sole recorded owner. No liens, no co-signers. You have absolute and total authority. I will draft a formal notice to quit possession under state law. Since there is no formal lease agreement on file, they are legally classified as tenants at will. 30 days is the standard legal minimum, but I will include a strict clause stating that any attempt to damage the property, remove fixtures, or alter the estate in any way will result in an immediate emergency lockout and criminal vandalism charges. I want them terrified to even leave a scratch on the hardwood floors before they leave." "Perfect," I agreed, staring out at the Los Angeles night sky. "And make the cease and desist aggressively clear. Inform him that any unauthorized listing of the property will result in an immediate report to the State Bar Association for gross professional misconduct. He wants to start his own private law firm. Let us threaten the one thing he actually values: his license to practice law." Warren chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that conveyed pure business. "I like your style, Piper. You do not just want them out on the street. You want to completely salt the earth behind them. I am also attaching a severe financial penalty clause. If they do not vacate by the 30-day deadline, I will initiate formal eviction proceedings that will remain on their public records permanently, effectively destroying their ability to rent or buy anywhere else in the state. Send the drafts to my encrypted email as soon as they are ready," I instructed, "but do not serve them yet. Do not mail them directly to the house. I am gathering a few other necessary items, and I will be delivering the notice personally in a very specific manner." Warren agreed, promising the finalized documents within the hour. I ended the call and let out a long, steady breath. Receipt number 1 was officially secured. The eviction notice was not just a piece of legal paper. It was a tangible manifestation of my absolute boundaries. For years, I had allowed them to live in a fantasy world heavily subsidized by my hard work. That fantasy was officially being foreclosed on. But an eviction notice alone was not enough. I needed to prove that Andre was completely morally bankrupt. It was time to check in on the private investigator. It was Friday morning, and the Southern California sun was burning away the early coastal fog. I was standing in my kitchen sipping my second cup of black coffee when my phone vibrated against the marble counter. It was a single text message from Elena, my private investigator. "Check your secure drop folder. Happy hunting." I walked back into my home office, the eviction notice from Warren already sitting neatly in a black folder on my desk. I sat down, unlocked my computer, and accessed the encrypted cloud drive. There was a new subfolder waiting for me labeled simply as Andre Background. I double-clicked it and was immediately met with a staggering volume of data. Elena had not just done a surface-level sweep. She had completely bypassed his amateur privacy settings and excavated his digital life. I opened the first document, an itemized expense report pulled directly from the secret credit card Marcus had uncovered the night before. But Elena had done something Marcus could not do. She had cross-referenced the credit card charges with Andre's cell phone location data and Uber receipts. The picture it painted was not just one of financial ruin. It was one of complete and utter betrayal. Every single time Andre told Sienna he was working late at the law firm preparing for a major deposition, his phone was pinging off cell towers in downtown Hartford. Every time he claimed he had to travel out of state for a legal seminar, his Uber account showed rides back and forth from the Hartford Marriott. I clicked on a subfolder titled Surveillance Photos. Elena's contact at the data firm must have pulled security footage or hired a local tail because there were dozens of high-resolution images. I clicked on the first photo and felt my jaw physically clench. The image showed Andre walking out of the Hartford Marriott lobby. He was not alone. His arm was wrapped tightly around the waist of a woman with striking red hair. I zoomed in on the woman's face, my stomach twisting with a mixture of disgust and cold validation. It was Chelsea, Sienna's absolute best friend, her college roommate, her maid of honor, the woman who was constantly over at their house drinking wine in my kitchen, pretending to be a supportive aunt to their children. I clicked through the next 30 photos. Andre and Chelsea at a high-end steakhouse. Andre and Chelsea kissing in a dimly lit parking garage. Andre buying Chelsea a pair of diamond earrings at a boutique jewelry store, the exact charge that had shown up on the secret credit card my father was paying off. It was not a brief lapse in judgment. It was a sustained, calculated, long-term affair entirely funded by my parents' draining bank accounts. Next, I opened the text message logs Elena had somehow managed to extract. The conversations between Andre and Chelsea were sickeningly domestic. They complained about Sienna constantly. Andre referred to his wife as a suffocating, deeply insecure anchor weighing down his potential. He promised Chelsea that as soon as he secured the funding to open his private practice, he was going to file for divorce, take half of the estate's value, and move Chelsea into a luxury condo. He was planning to steal my house not just to fund a law firm, but to finance his escape with his wife's best friend. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. Sienna had spent the entire week insulting me, calling me a lonely, miserable spinster, and bragging about her perfect marriage. My mother had screamed at me for being jealous of Sienna's incredible husband. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. Their golden child's marriage was a complete sham, an empty shell held together by my money and Chelsea's lies. And the anniversary party they were throwing tonight, the one they were so desperate for me to attend, was going to be filled with the very people who were laughing behind their backs. I knew for a fact Chelsea was on the guest list. I did not feel sorry for Sienna. For years she had used her marriage as a weapon to make me feel small. She had stolen from me, lied to me, and allowed her husband to mentally abuse me. She wanted a show. She wanted to project an image of untouchable perfection to the Connecticut elite. I was going to give her a reality check she would never forget. I turned on my high-capacity laser printer, the machine whirred to life, humming with purpose. I selected the clearest, most undeniable photos of Andre and Chelsea together. I selected the hotel receipts. I selected the text message where Andre explicitly discussed stealing the house equity to fund his divorce. I hit print. The glossy paper began sliding out of the machine, one devastating piece of evidence after another. Receipt number 2 was officially ready, but before I sealed the envelope, I had one more folder from Elena to review. It was the background check on my parents. I clicked back into Elena's main directory and located the final folder labeled Jeffrey Financial Anomalies. My father had always been the quiet enabler in our family. While my mother screamed and demanded, Jeffrey would simply sigh, retreat into his study, and quietly sign whatever checks were necessary to keep the peace. He played the role of the exhausted, beleaguered patriarch who sacrificed everything for his ungrateful wife and demanding youngest daughter. It was a compelling performance, but as I opened the first PDF, I quickly realized it was an absolute lie. Elena had flagged a recurring wire transfer originating from my father's private undisclosed savings account. It was an account my mother clearly knew nothing about, as it was not linked to any of their joint assets. On the 15th of every single month for the past 11 years, an exact sum of $3,500 was wired to a recipient named Sylvia Rossi, residing in a quiet suburb just 30 minutes north of our hometown. I furrowed my brow scanning the transaction history. That was over $40,000 a year systematically drained from the family wealth secretly sent to a woman I had never heard of. I opened the next subfolder, which Elena had simply titled Surveillance Sylvia. The first photograph was a wide shot of a charming, modest house with a well-kept garden. The second photograph zoomed in on the driveway. There was my father, Jeffrey, wearing his weekend khakis, casually unloading groceries from the trunk of his car, alongside a petite, dark-haired woman, Sylvia. But it was the third photograph that caused all the air to rush out of my lungs. Jeffrey and Sylvia were standing on the front porch, smiling warmly, and standing right between them, holding a college acceptance letter and grinning from ear to ear, was a young boy who looked remarkably like a teenage version of my father. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of the deception. My father did not just have a mistress, he had a completely separate secret family. While Beatrice was constantly berating him for not earning enough to fund her country club lifestyle, while Sienna was demanding luxury cars and expensive vacations, Jeffrey was quietly funding a second household just half an hour away. He was paying child support, perhaps even private school tuition, out of a shadow account while his legitimate family spiraled into massive debt. I leaned back, a cold realization washing over me. This was why my parents were so incredibly broke. This was why they had practically begged me to buy the house for Sienna 4 years ago. It was not just because Beatrice spent too much on designer clothes. It was because my father had been quietly siphoning a massive portion of his income to support his second life. The hypocrisy was absolutely breathtaking. For my entire life, my parents had weaponized the concept of family loyalty against me. They had constantly told me I was selfish, that I did not understand the sacrifices required to keep a family together. Meanwhile, Beatrice was bleeding their accounts dry for social status, and Jeffrey was quite literally maintaining a second family in the next town over. I selected the clearest photographs of Jeffrey, Sylvia, and the teenage boy. I highlighted the 11 years of consecutive bank transfers. I hit print again. The printer hummed, delivering the undeniable proof of my father's ultimate betrayal. As I gathered the warm sheets of paper, a strange sense of calm settled over me. There was no sadness. There was no grief for the family I thought I had. The toxic structure that had defined my entire existence was built on an incredibly fragile foundation of lies, financial fraud, and profound infidelity. And they had the absolute nerve to try and steal my property to keep their rotten house of cards from collapsing. They were hosting their grand anniversary party tonight, a celebration of love, family, and success. Sienna would be wearing an expensive gown bought with stolen money. Andre would be giving a toast to a wife he actively despised. Beatrice would be bragging about a wealth that did not exist. And Jeffrey would be smiling for the cameras, playing the role of the devoted father while his secret son lived just 30 miles away. I looked at the stack of documents on my desk, the eviction notice, the proof of Andre's affair with the maid of honor, the bank statements revealing Jeffrey's secret family. It was a collection of pure, unadulterated truth. But as I reached for a large, heavy black envelope to package the documents, I noticed one final file sitting at the very bottom of Elena's directory. It was labeled Medical Anomaly. I clicked on it completely unaware that I was about to discover the final explosive secret that would burn my family to the ground. The file opened to a scanned copy of a routine hospital admission form from over a decade ago. It was from the time Sienna had her appendix removed in high school. I scanned the standard medical data until my eyes snagged on a single glaring detail in the top right corner. Sienna was listed as having an AB negative blood type. My pulse quickened as my mind immediately snapped back to a corporate health drive I had participated in with my father years prior. Jeffrey was strictly O positive. I remembered Beatrice complaining loudly during a family vacation about being O negative. Basic high school biology flooded my thoughts. Two type O parents could absolutely never produce a child with an AB blood type. It was scientifically impossible. I stared at the glowing pixels of the medical form, the sheer magnitude of the implication locking my jaw. Beatrice, the matriarch who constantly preached about family values and the sanctity of marriage, had carried a secret far more devastating than my father funding a second household. Sienna was not my father's biological daughter. The golden child, the perfect suburban princess who was constantly weaponized against me, was the product of an affair my mother had successfully hidden for nearly 30 years. Suddenly, the entire toxic dynamic of our family made perfect twisted sense. Beatrice overcompensated with Sienna because she was a walking manifestation of her own infidelity. Jeffrey likely knew the truth and retreated into his secret second family as a silent retaliation. They were bound together not by love, but by mutually assured destruction and decades of suffocating lies. I let out a low, breathy laugh that echoed in the quiet of my penthouse. They had all treated me like an outsider because I was the only person in that sprawling Connecticut house who was actually living in reality. I was the only legitimate reflection of their miserable union, which was exactly why they resented me so deeply. I quickly hit print on the medical admission forms, carefully highlighting the blood type fields with a bright yellow marker. I then typed up a brief single-page explanation of basic genetic inheritance laws, keeping the language clinical, cold, and utterly irrefutable. Receipt number 4 was officially complete. The arsenal was fully assembled and ready. I walked into my bedroom closet and pulled down an elegant, heavy black gift box I had saved from a luxury corporate event. It was made of thick matte cardboard with a velvet-lined interior designed to look incredibly expensive. It was the perfect Trojan horse for a high-society anniversary party. I returned to my desk and slowly began the meticulous process of packing the explosive contents. First, I placed the 30-day eviction notice and the aggressive cease and desist order from my lawyer at the very bottom. That was the foundational reality check they desperately needed. Over that, I laid the thick stack of glossy photographs showing Andre kissing Chelsea outside the Hartford Marriott, right alongside the printed text message logs where he arrogantly plotted to steal his wife's inheritance. Next went the banking records and surveillance photos of Jeffrey smiling warmly with his secret teenage son. Finally, I placed the highlighted medical records and the genetic explanation of Sienna's parentage squarely on top. It would be the very first thing she saw when she lifted the lid. I closed the heavy black lid, the velvet edge making a soft, definitive thud. I tied a thick silver silk ribbon around the box, securing it with a perfectly symmetrical bow. It looked like a generous anniversary gift from a successful older sister. It looked like an apology. It looked like submission. I printed a priority overnight shipping label addressed directly to Sienna at my property in Connecticut. I specifically requested a signature upon delivery, ensuring the courier would personally walk it right up to the front door during the height of their catered evening event. I grabbed my car keys, picked up the heavy black box, and took the elevator down to the basement parking garage. I drove straight to the primary logistics hub near the airport, handing the package over to a clerk just minutes before the final overnight shipping cutoff time. As the clerk scanned the barcode and tossed the box onto the outbound conveyor belt, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The heavy burden I had carried for my entire life was sitting inside that box, hurtling its way toward the East Coast. My part in their twisted game was officially over. Tomorrow night, the box would arrive and the perfect family would finally meet their true, horrific selves. I walked back to my car, breathed in the cool California air and smiled. Let the absolute destruction finally commence now. Friday evening in Connecticut was unseasonably warm. the kind of perfect early autumn twilight that wealthy suburbanites prayed for when hosting outdoor events. My property, a sprawling colonial estate nestled at the end of a private cul-de-sac, was completely transformed. From my vantage point in Los Angeles, I could easily picture the scene based on the frantic text messages my aunts were still sending to the family group chat. The facade was in full swing. White string lights were draped elegantly across the massive oak trees in the backyard. A large temporary teak dance floor had been installed over the manicured lawn. A string quartet hired at an exorbitant hourly rate was playing classical covers of modern pop songs near the custom-built stone fire pit. Waiters in crisp white shirts and black ties circulated through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with seared scallops and crystal flutes of imported champagne. The air smelled of expensive perfume, catered food, and the desperate, suffocating desire to impress. Sienna was holding court near the edge of the patio, wearing a stunning floor-length emerald gown that clung perfectly to her figure. She was laughing loudly, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder as she chatted with the wives of the senior partners from Andre's law firm. She was playing the role of the ultimate successful hostess, the picture-perfect mother and wife whose life was an endless series of triumphs. She subtly adjusted her diamond tennis bracelet, making sure it caught the warm light of the patio lanterns. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry, one that my father was currently paying 18% interest on through a shadow credit card. Andre was working the opposite side of the yard, nursing a tumbler of aged scotch. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a practiced, confident smile. He was strategically positioning himself near the managing partners of his firm, loudly offering his opinions on recent high-profile mergers and acquisitions, desperately trying to sound like a man who belonged in their tax bracket. He clinked his glass against theirs, absorbing their casual compliments about the beauty of his home and the elegance of his wife. "Thank you," Andre said, his voice booming with forced humility. "Sienna and I have worked incredibly hard to build this life. We wanted to create a space that truly reflects our values and our commitment to our family." It was a brilliant performance. Not a single person in that backyard, surrounded by the glow of the string lights and the soft music, had any idea that the man giving the toast was actively planning to commit felony real estate fraud to save himself from total financial collapse. They did not know that his beautiful wife was not genetically related to the man she called her father. They only saw the glossy exterior, the perfect Connecticut dream that Sienna and Andre were selling. Standing near the elegant outdoor bar, my mother Beatrice was entirely in her element. She wore a tailored cream suit, holding a delicate coupe of champagne. She was actively mingling with her country club friends, her voice carrying over the soft chatter. "It is just so wonderful to see them so happy," Beatrice gushed to Mrs. Gable, the head of the neighborhood association. "Jeffrey and I always knew they were destined for great things. We are just so proud to be able to provide them with this beautiful estate to start their family. It is what family does after all. We support each other." My father Jeffrey was standing a few feet away, nursing a club soda. He offered a tight, polite smile whenever someone congratulated him on his generous gift to his daughter. He looked exhausted, the weight of his secret double life pulling at the corners of his eyes. While Beatrice bragged about their immense generosity, Jeffrey was likely calculating exactly how much this catered party was adding to their already insurmountable mountain of debt. He checked his watch, a subtle, nervous habit he always displayed when he wanted to escape a conversation. Perhaps he was wondering what his other son, the teenager living 30 miles away, was doing tonight. Chelsea, Sienna's maid of honor and absolute best friend, was also navigating the crowd. She wore a sleek red cocktail dress and a bright, supportive smile. Every time Sienna looked her way, Chelsea raised her glass in a silent toast to the happy couple. But every time Sienna turned her back, Chelsea's eyes immediately found Andre across the lawn. They exchanged brief, loaded glances. The secret lovers silently communicating their shared anticipation of the divorce they were secretly planning, funded entirely by my stolen equity. It was a masterpiece of suburban theater. Everyone was playing a role. Everyone was lying to everyone else. The music played, the champagne flowed, and the guests marveled at the sheer perfection of the evening. They were completely oblivious to the fact that a heavy black box currently sitting in the back of a delivery truck navigating the winding Connecticut roads was about to detonate right in the middle of their carefully constructed paradise. While the string quartet transitioned into a lively classical rendition of a popular radio hit, my mother continued her carefully orchestrated tour of the backyard. Beatrice was a master at working a room. She knew exactly when to smile brightly and when to let a tragic maternal shadow cross her face. She navigated toward a cluster of high-top tables near the catered buffet, zeroing in on the senior partners from Andre's law firm and their wives. These were the most important people at the party, the gatekeepers to the wealth and status she so desperately craved. She approached them with a fresh glass of champagne, her face glowing with false modesty as they showered her with compliments about the estate and the beautiful anniversary celebration. It was only a matter of time before the inevitable question was asked. Mrs. Sterling, the wife of the firm's managing partner, leaned in closely. "The house is simply stunning, Beatrice," she noted, her eyes sweeping over the meticulously landscaped gardens. "But tell me, where is your other daughter tonight? We were hoping to finally meet Piper. I heard she lives out in Los Angeles now." Beatrice let out a long, perfectly practiced sigh. She lowered her eyes, staring down at her crystal flute, as if the champagne suddenly contained a profound tragedy. The lively energy completely drained from her posture. "Oh, Piper," Beatrice murmured, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper designed to draw the entire group in closer. "We really hoped she would be able to make it tonight. We practically begged her to come home for this. But sadly, Piper is going through a very difficult time right now. She is deeply troubled." The wives exchanged sympathetic glances. Troubled was a fantastic country club buzzword. It implied something dark without requiring messy details. "What a shame," Mrs. Sterling offered gently. "It is completely heartbreaking," Beatrice continued, shaking her head. "Ever since Sienna married Andre and built this beautiful life, Piper has struggled. She has always been fiercely competitive, but lately it has spiraled into something else entirely. She is intensely jealous of her sister. She simply cannot stand to be around Sienna's success. It eats away at her. That is why she ran off to California last year. She could not handle the reality that Sienna was thriving while she was completely alone." Jeffrey drifted over just in time to hear this spectacular fabrication. Instead of correcting his wife, my father simply placed a heavy hand on Beatrice's shoulder. He cast his eyes downward, playing the role of the silent, suffering patriarch. His presence completely validated the lie. If both parents looked this devastated, the guests naturally assumed the story had to be true. "We try to support her," Beatrice whispered, dabbing the corner of her eye with a cocktail napkin. "We pay her bills when she asks, and we leave the door open. But right now, we had to make a very tough family decision. Piper is currently in a residential rehab facility in Malibu. We forced her to go. She needs intense psychological help to deal with her bitterness and her other issues. We told her she could not come to the party because she would only try to sabotage Sienna's special night. We had to protect Sienna and Andre." A collective gasp rippled through the small group of wealthy guests. Rehab. The word hung in the humid Connecticut air like heavy perfume. In one incredibly calculated conversation, my mother had completely rewritten history. She took my financial independence and strict boundaries, twisting them into a narrative of addiction and mental illness. By telling everyone I was in rehab because I was crazed with jealousy, she ensured that if I ever tried to tell the truth about the house, these people would simply dismiss me as a bitter, unstable addict, seeking revenge against her perfect family. Sienna spotted the group and glided over, sensing the shift in conversation. She linked her arm through Beatrice's and rested her head on my mother's shoulder. "Are we talking about Piper?" Sienna asked softly, projecting absolute angelic grace. "Please do not judge her. I pray for my sister every single day. I told Andre that the greatest anniversary gift I could ever ask for is just for Piper to finally find peace and stop hating us." "Oh, you sweet girl," Mrs. Sterling cooed, reaching out to squeeze Sienna's hand. "You are so incredibly forgiving. Andre is a lucky man to have such a wonderfully compassionate wife. Your family is incredibly strong to carry such a heavy burden with so much grace. Sienna smiled bravely, soaking up the praise like a sponge. The smear campaign was an absolute triumph. They had elevated themselves to martyrdom by completely destroying my character. They felt untouchable. But just beyond the tall privacy hedges of the backyard, the heavy diesel engine of a delivery truck shifted into park at the end of the driveway. The courier stepped out of the cab carrying a sleek black box tied with a silver ribbon and began walking directly toward the front door. The string quartet had just finished their set and the soft hum of conversation filled the backyard. Andre stood up from his seat near the center of the patio and tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp, clear sound cut through the ambient noise, demanding the immediate attention of all 50 guests. The chatter instantly died down. Waiters stopped circulating with trays of food. All eyes turned toward Andre, who was smoothing the lapels of his expensive charcoal suit with an air of practiced solemnity. He was ready for his grand moment, his carefully scripted performance designed to solidify his reputation as the ultimate family man in front of his firm's senior partners. Thank you all so much for being here tonight to celebrate 5 incredible years. Andre began, his voice projecting confidently across the manicured lawn. He reached out and pulled Sienna close to his side. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, playing the role of the adoring wife with absolute perfection. Building a life together is never easy, but it is built on a foundation of trust, loyalty, and unwavering family values. Sienna is my rock. She is the reason I push myself so hard at the firm every single day. This beautiful home, this life we have created, it is all a testament to the strength of our partnership and the incredible support of our family. He raised his glass toward my parents, Jeffrey and Beatrice, who were standing nearby. Jeffrey offered a tight smile, while Beatrice beamed with pride, visibly soaking up the public validation. They had successfully funded this illusion, and now they were enjoying the applause. Andre continued his speech, his ego expanding with every word. We believe in transparency, we believe in honesty, and most importantly, we believe in supporting those we love no matter what. That is what true family does. Right on cue. As if the universe itself had decided to participate in the irony of his speech, the heavy wrought iron gate at the side of the property swung open with a loud creak. A courier wearing a crisp uniform stepped onto the patio, holding a sleek black box tied with a silver ribbon. He looked momentarily confused by the sea of formal wear and champagne flutes, but he quickly spotted Sienna, who was glowing in her emerald gown at the center of the crowd. "Excuse me," the courier said, his voice hesitant but loud enough to disrupt the absolute silence Andre had commanded. "I have a VIP overnight delivery for Sienna. It requires a direct signature." Andre paused mid-sentence, a flicker of irritation crossing his perfectly composed face. He hated being interrupted, especially when he was holding court. Sienna, however, let out a delighted gasp. She stepped away from her husband and practically glided toward the courier. A VIP delivery. She practically squealed, her eyes widening with manufactured surprise. She turned to the crowd, addressing the senior partners' wives directly. "Oh my goodness, I wonder who this could be from." The wives murmured appreciatively, thoroughly charmed by the apparent spontaneity of the moment. Sienna signed the electronic pad with a flourish and took the heavy black box from the courier. She walked back to the center table, placing it right next to the towering tiered anniversary cake. The silver ribbon gleamed under the warm light of the patio lanterns. "Open it," someone from the crowd urged cheerfully. "Yes, open it," Beatrice chimed in, stepping closer to her golden child. "It must be something incredibly special if it was rushed here tonight." Sienna did not need to be told twice. She loved being the center of attention. She loved the suspense of unwrapping a luxury item in front of an audience. She assumed it was an expensive piece of jewelry from a wealthy client of Andre's firm, or perhaps an extravagant gift from a family friend trying to make an impression. She had absolutely no idea that she was standing over an active landmine I had carefully assembled 2,400 miles away. "I think we should open it right now," Sienna announced to the crowd, her voice ringing with excitement. "Let us see what beautiful surprise someone sent us to celebrate our love." Andre smiled indulgently, wrapping his arm around her waist once more. The string quartet softly resumed playing in the background. The guests leaned in, holding their breath, completely captivated by the perfect picture of suburban bliss. Chelsea, the maid of honor, stood near the edge of the crowd, watching Andre intently. Jeffrey shifted his weight, checking his watch again. Beatrice stood practically vibrating with anticipation. Sienna reached down with perfectly manicured fingers. She pulled the silver ribbon. It fell away effortlessly. She placed her hands on either side of the heavy black lid and slowly lifted it off, exposing the velvet-lined interior. The crowd leaned in closer, waiting for the reveal of diamonds or crystal. Instead, Sienna's bright, triumphant smile instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of profound and absolute confusion as she stared down at a thick stack of legal documents resting on top of high-resolution photographs. Sienna's manicured nails hovered over the thick stack of premium paper, her brain struggling to comprehend why a luxury gift box contained a thick legal dossier. The soft glow of the patio lanterns illuminated the bold text at the top of the page. She lifted the first document, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. The crowd remained completely silent, eagerly waiting for the grand reveal. "What is it, darling?" Andre asked, stepping closer with a relaxed smile, assuming it was an elaborate prank, or perhaps a novelty certificate from a friend. "I do not understand," Sienna muttered, her voice carrying over the incredibly quiet yard. She began to read the bold heading aloud. "Notice to quit possession. Formal eviction notice. To Sienna and Andre. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within exactly 30 days. A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the guests. Andre's relaxed smile evaporated. The color drained from his face as his legal training kicked in. He knew exactly what a notice to quit possession was. He lunged forward, reaching out to snatch the paper from her hands. "Give me that, Sienna! It is just a sick joke," he hissed, his voice dropping into a panicked register. But Sienna pulled back, her eyes rapidly scanning the rest of the page. "No, wait a minute," she said, her voice rising in pitch as panic set in. "It says it is from a law firm in downtown Hartford. It says any attempt to alter or damage the property will result in immediate criminal vandalism charges." "Andre, what is this? Why does it say Piper is terminating our tenancy? Piper does not own our house." Andre made an aggressive grab for the paper, but his jerky movement caused the black box to tip over. The contents spilled across the white linen tablecloth. Right on top of the pile was the official county property deed, complete with the government seal. Aunt Brenda, who had positioned herself at the front of the crowd to get the best view of the gift, did what she did best. She was notoriously nosy, thriving on family gossip, and her hands were faster than Andre's. She snatched the heavy parchment deed right off the table. "Let me see that," Aunt Brenda declared, adjusting her reading glasses. She squinted at the document, her mouth falling open in shock. "Oh, my lord," she gasped loudly, turning to look directly at my mother. "Beatrice, what is the meaning of this? This official property deed says Piper is the sole legal owner of this entire estate. There is no mention of Sienna or Andre anywhere on this document. Piper bought this house." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a suffocating quiet that completely smothered the joyful anniversary atmosphere. The senior partners from the law firm exchanged sharp, knowing glances. Mrs. Sterling, the managing partner's wife, who had just praised Beatrice for her incredible generosity, took a slow step back from my mother. The beautiful, wealthy illusion my family meticulously maintained for 4 years shattered into a million pieces in seconds. Andre stood frozen. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He had spent the entire evening bragging to his bosses about building his life, his investments, and his home. Now 50 of the most influential people in his social circle were staring at him, realizing he was nothing more than a glorified tenant living entirely off his sister-in-law's charity. Worse, he was a tenant who was currently being aggressively evicted. Beatrice frantically tried to run damage control. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. Brenda put that away. Beatrice stammered, waving her hands wildly. "It is a mistake. It is just a massive misunderstanding. Piper is in a facility, remember. She is not in her right mind. She must have hired some terrible lawyer to harass us because she is so sick and jealous. But the damage was already done, and the crowd was not buying the lie anymore. You do not accidentally forge a government property deed, Beatrice. And you certainly do not accidentally hire a ruthless litigator to serve a 30-day notice. The whispers began. They started soft like the rustling of dry leaves, but quickly grew into a steady, undeniable buzz of wealthy suburban gossip. People were pointing, people were staring. Sienna stood at the table clutching the eviction notice to her chest, her emerald gown suddenly looking like a costume she had stolen. The golden child was entirely exposed. But the eviction notice was only the very first layer of the nightmare. As Andre desperately tried to gather the spilled papers to hide the rest of the terrifying contents, the scattered high-resolution photographs had already caught the eye of Chelsea, the maid of honor. Sienna's hands shook uncontrollably as she dropped the eviction notice onto the table. Her perfect world was tilting violently on its axis, but the box was far from empty. Driven by a morbid, desperate curiosity, she reached into the scattered pile and pulled out the next document. It was not a legal form. It was a thick stack of glossy, high-resolution photographs bound together with a severe black binder clip. Sienna flipped the top photograph over, bringing it into the warm glow of the patio lanterns. The breath left her lungs in a sharp, audible gasp. It was the surveillance shot of Andre walking out of the Hartford Marriott, his arm wrapped intimately around a woman with striking red hair. The woman whose face was turned up toward his, smiling brilliantly. "What is this?" Sienna whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sudden intense hush of the crowd. She flipped to the next photo. Andre and Chelsea at a dimly lit steakhouse holding hands across the table. She flipped again. Andre pressing Chelsea against the side of his car in a parking garage, kissing her deeply. The images were undeniable. They were clear, bright, and absolutely devastating. Sienna's head snapped up. Her eyes darted frantically across the crowd, instantly zeroing in on Chelsea. Her maid of honor, her absolute best friend, the woman she had trusted implicitly, was standing less than 10 feet away near the outdoor bar. Chelsea's face was completely drained of color. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck. She took a slow, terrified step backward, her red cocktail dress stark against the white patio furniture. "You," Sienna shrieked. The sound tore from her throat, raw and primal, completely destroying the elegant, composed image she had curated for the entire evening. "You are sleeping with my husband." The entire backyard exploded into chaos. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly, the cellist letting out a sharp, discordant scrape of the bow. The senior partners and their wives gasped collectively, stepping back, as if the space around the table had suddenly become radioactive. The wealthy suburbanites who had just been praising Andre's family values were now witnessing a spectacular, completely unhinged public implosion. Sienna lunged across the table, knocking over the towering anniversary cake. The intricate tiers of vanilla buttercream collapsed onto the patio stones with a wet splat, completely ignored. She grabbed the rest of the photographs and the printed text message logs and threw them directly at Andre's chest. The glossy paper fluttered through the air like confetti. "Explain this!" Sienna screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Explain why there are text messages here where you call me a suffocating anchor. Explain why you are planning to steal my sister's house to fund your divorce so you can buy Chelsea a condo." Andre stood completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The arrogant, composed junior attorney who loved to hear himself speak was entirely speechless. He looked desperately at the senior partners from his firm. They were not looking back at him with sympathy or understanding. They were looking at him with profound professional disgust. His career at the firm was effectively over right then and there. You do not survive the public revelation of a massive real estate fraud conspiracy coupled with an aggressive, highly documented affair. "It is not what it looks like," Andre finally stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "These are out of context. Someone is trying to ruin us." "Out of context?" Sienna laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. "You are kissing my best friend outside a hotel. How do you take that out of context?" Chelsea turned and bolted. She did not say a word. She dropped her champagne flute onto the grass and ran toward the iron gate, her high heels clicking frantically against the stone pavers. Sienna did not chase her. She turned her absolute fury back onto Andre, slapping him hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the yard. Beatrice rushed forward, trying to pull Sienna back. "Darling, please, you are making a scene," Beatrice pleaded, still desperately trying to salvage some shred of public dignity. "We can handle this inside. Do not let these people see you like this." But Sienna shoved her mother away violently. "Do not touch me," she yelled. "My entire marriage is a lie. This house is a lie. Everything is a lie." The guests began retreating toward the driveway, muttering quietly, completely eager to escape the radioactive fallout, but absolutely thrilled by the incredibly scandalous gossip they had just witnessed. Andre was ruined. Sienna was humiliated. But the heavy black box was still sitting sideways on the table, and it had not yet finished its destructive work. Beatrice reached down to right the box, trying to shove the remaining papers back inside to hide them from the lingering guests, completely unaware that she was about to pull the pin on the final, most devastating grenade of the evening. Beatrice's hands were trembling violently as she grabbed the heavy black cardboard of the box. She was operating on pure suburban survival instinct, desperate to sweep the remaining papers out of sight before the last few influential guests could witness any more of the carnage. "Move out of the way," Sienna Beatrice hissed, pushing her sobbing daughter aside. "Let me just pack this away. It is all lies. Piper is completely unhinged and she is trying to humiliate us." But as Beatrice tipped the box upward, the heavy stack of banking records and surveillance photographs slid out from the velvet interior, cascading directly onto the white tablecloth. Jeffrey, who had been standing frozen in horrified silence since the eviction notice dropped, finally stepped forward. He reached out to help his wife gather the mess, his face pale and tight with anger at the incredible spectacle his family was making. His hand closed over the top sheet of paper. It was the high-resolution photograph of the modest suburban house 30 miles away. Jeffrey froze. His eyes darted to the next photo lying face up on the table. It was him standing on the porch with Sylvia and their teenage son. Attached to the photographs was the highlighted forensic accounting spreadsheet detailing 11 years of consecutive wire transfers from his hidden shadow account. Jeffrey dropped the papers as if they were physically burning his fingers. The color entirely drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and incredibly ancient. Beatrice, whose eyes were tracking her husband's sudden panic, looked down at the table. She snatched up the photograph of Jeffrey, with the dark-haired woman and the teenage boy. She stared at it, her brain struggling to process the image of her exhausted, financially drained husband, looking so incredibly happy and relaxed with another family. Then her eyes fell upon the bank statements. She saw the exact figure of $3,500 wired every single month without fail. A guttural, horrifying sound erupted from my mother's throat. It was not a scream of sadness. It was a roar of absolute territorial rage. "You are giving our money to a whore!" Beatrice shrieked, the sound echoing off the brick facade of the house. The remaining guests, who had been slowly edging toward the driveway, stopped dead in their tracks, entirely captivated by this massive new explosion. "You have been lying to me for over a decade. We are drowning in debt. I cannot even pay the minimums on my credit cards, and you have been quietly funding a secret bastard child in the next town over." Beatrice lunged at Jeffrey, striking his chest with her manicured fists. "You pathetic lying coward! You let me beg Piper to buy this house because you were giving our fortune to another woman." Jeffrey caught her wrists, his own face twisting into an ugly snarl. "Do not act like you are the victim here, Beatrice," he yelled back, his voice raw. "You bled me dry. You demanded a lifestyle we could never afford. Sylvia actually respects me. She does not treat me like a walking ATM just to impress people who do not even care about us." As they violently struggled against each other, Beatrice yanked her arm free, knocking the last remaining document off the edge of the table. The medical admission form drifted slowly toward the patio stones, landing face up, right at Jeffrey's expensive leather shoes. The bright yellow highlighter practically glowed against the stark white paper. Jeffrey looked down his chest, heaving from the physical exertion of their argument. He saw Sienna's name printed clearly at the top of the medical record. He saw the brightly highlighted AB negative blood type. The anger on his face suddenly morphed into a chilling, absolute stillness. He slowly bent down and picked up the paper, completely ignoring his wife's continued screaming. He read my attached note detailing the basic laws of genetic inheritance. Jeffrey was O positive. Beatrice was O negative. Jeffrey slowly raised his head. He looked at Sienna, who was still weeping uncontrollably over her destroyed marriage. Then he looked directly at Beatrice. The silence that fell between my parents was far more terrifying than the screaming had been. Sienna has an AB negative blood type. Jeffrey stated, his voice completely devoid of all human emotion. Two parents with type O blood cannot biologically produce an AB child. Beatrice stopped breathing. Her hands froze mid-air. The defensive rage completely vanished from her eyes, replaced by naked, undeniable terror. Jeffrey took a slow step toward her, holding the medical record up like a literal death warrant. "Who is her father, Beatrice?" He did not yell. The quietness of his question carried a lethal weight. "For 30 years you treated Piper like absolute garbage because she wasn't perfect enough for you. You made me worship Sienna. You made me bankrupt myself to give her this incredible house, and she is not even my own daughter." "I do not know what you are talking about," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling so badly the words barely formed. "That is fake. Piper forged it." "Stop lying to me," Jeffrey roared, the sound tearing through the quiet suburban night. The ultimate explosion had finally arrived. The nuclear family, built entirely on a foundation of adultery, fraud, and severe financial abuse, was completely incinerated in a matter of minutes. Jeffrey did not wait for Beatrice to formulate another pathetic excuse. He threw the medical record right at her chest. It fluttered to the patio stones, landing beside the smashed vanilla buttercream cake. The sheer volume of Jeffrey's roar broke whatever spell of politeness still held the remaining guests captive. Complete chaos erupted across the manicured lawn. The facade of the elegant anniversary party collapsed entirely, replaced by a scene of utter suburban warfare. Mrs. Sterling grabbed her husband by the arm, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and undeniable thrill. "We are leaving right now," she commanded, though several of the younger associates from the law firm were already backing away with their cell phones raised. The small, glowing lenses of their cameras were pointed directly at the main table, recording every single second of the spectacular meltdown. Beatrice saw the phones and let out a frantic, high-pitched shriek. "Stop recording us!" she wailed, lunging toward a junior attorney and swatting wildly at the air. "This is a private family matter." But there was absolutely nothing private about it anymore. Andre, who had been staring blankly at the photos of his infidelity scattered across the grass, suddenly snapped out of his shock. He looked at the senior partners marching toward the driveway. He looked at Sienna, who was now clutching her ruined emerald gown and sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Then he looked at the 30-day eviction notice still resting on the table. The math in his head calculated incredibly fast. His career was over, his marriage was exposed, and he was about to be legally thrown out onto the street. Andre spun around and sprinted toward the back door of the colonial house. He did not say a word to his weeping wife. Sienna saw him retreating and scrambled over the overturned chairs to chase him. "Andre, wait!" she screamed, her voice cracking in pure desperation. "Where are you going? You cannot just leave me here with them!" He did not even slow down. Sienna chased him through the French doors and into the kitchen. I could easily picture the scene inside my house. Andre frantically pulling a canvas duffel bag from the hall closet, haphazardly stuffing it with whatever expensive suits and watches he could grab. He was in full survival mode, shedding his perfect family man persona like a cheap suit. Sienna grabbed his arm as he zipped the bag shut. "Please, we can fix this," she begged, her face a mask of smeared mascara and absolute terror. "We can talk to Piper, we can apologize." Andre violently yanked his arm free, his face twisted in pure disgust. "There is no fixing this, Sienna." He spat, his voice echoing in the empty kitchen. "You do not even know who your real father is. Your mother is broke, your sister is evicting us, and I am entirely done pretending to tolerate you. Get out of my way." He pushed past her, leaving his golden child wife collapsing onto the hardwood floor, crying hysterically as he walked out the front door and disappeared into the night. Back out on the patio, the battle between my parents was reaching its final brutal conclusion. Beatrice was clutching Jeffrey's jacket, begging him to lower his voice and think about their reputation in the country club. Their reputation. Even in the middle of absolute financial and moral ruin, my mother was still obsessed with what the neighbors would think. Jeffrey looked down at her hands gripping his lapels. He reached up and peeled her fingers off his jacket one by one with terrifying calmness. "I do not care about the country club, Beatrice," he said, his voice flat and dead. "I do not care about this fake life we built. I am heavily in debt because of your delusions, and I have spent 30 years raising another man's child while pretending you were a loyal wife. I am absolutely done." "Where are you going?" Beatrice demanded, panic finally replacing her anger as he turned toward the side gate. "You cannot just leave me here to clean up this massive mess." "I am going home to Sylvia," Jeffrey replied without looking back. "To my actual son. To a family that does not make me physically sick." He walked down the driveway, ignoring the few remaining guests who were rushing to their luxury cars. He climbed into his sedan, started the engine, and drove away, leaving Beatrice standing completely alone amidst the wreckage of the party. Within 20 incredibly short minutes, the estate was entirely evacuated. The string quartet had fled without packing their music stands. The caterers abandoned their stations. The perfect nuclear family had entirely collapsed inside, leaving nothing behind but an absolute suffocating silence tonight. Saturday morning arrived in Connecticut, but the sun did not bring any warmth to the sprawling colonial estate. The morning light only illuminated the sheer devastation left behind. The physical wreckage of the party was scattered across the manicured lawn, like the aftermath of a bizarre, wealthy hurricane. The expensive teak dance floor was covered in spilled champagne and discarded cocktail napkins. The catering tables were stripped bare except for the large, sticky stain where the vanilla buttercream cake had been violently shoved to the ground. And sitting right in the center of the patio table, anchored by an empty champagne flute, was the heavy black box that had methodically dismantled 4 separate lives. Inside the house, the silence was absolute and suffocating. Sienna woke up on the living room sofa, still wearing her ruined emerald gown. The silk fabric was wrinkled and stained with tears. She stared blankly at the vaulted ceiling, her mind replaying the horror of the previous night on an endless, agonizing loop. Andre was gone. He had not returned, and his side of the closet in their master bedroom was completely empty. Chelsea was gone, presumably packing her own bags to meet Andre. But the most terrifying realization was the massive gaping void where her identity used to be. For 28 years, Sienna had been the golden child, the biological daughter of Jeffrey and Beatrice, the heir to the family legacy. Now she was a stranger in a house she did not even own, abandoned by a husband who despised her, and biologically disconnected from the man she had called Dad her entire life. Upstairs, Beatrice was completely unraveling. She sat on the edge of her massive, king-sized bed, wrapped in a plush robe, staring at her iPhone with manic intensity. The neighborhood group chat, usually a reliable source of mundane updates about landscaping and tennis schedules, was completely silent. No one was reaching out to see if she was okay. No one was offering sympathy. But Beatrice knew exactly what was happening behind the digital curtain. The wives of the senior partners, the country club committee members, the neighborhood gossips, they were all in separate, frantic group chats, dissecting every single second of the meltdown. The story of Andre's affair, the eviction notice, and Jeffrey's secret family was spreading through the affluent suburb faster than a wildfire. Beatrice's entire sense of self-worth was inextricably tied to her social standing. She had sacrificed her finances, her marriage, and her relationship with her eldest daughter just to maintain the illusion of upper-class perfection. Now she was an absolute pariah. The women she had desperately tried to impress would never invite her to another luncheon. They would smile tightly if they saw her at the grocery store, but they would cross the aisle to avoid speaking to her. She was ruined. Desperate to regain some semblance of control, Beatrice opened her banking app. If she could just move some money around, perhaps she could hire a crisis publicist or a high-powered divorce attorney to punish Jeffrey. She clicked on her primary checking account, the joint account she shared with my father. The screen loaded, displaying a bright red banner across the top. Account frozen. Panic clawed at her throat. She tapped the screen frantically, trying to access their savings, the line of credit, the secondary checking account. Frozen. 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 Jeffrey had not just driven away to his second family. The moment the banks opened on the East Coast, he had executed a catastrophic financial strike. Knowing Beatrice's tendency to spend wildly when stressed, he had preemptively frozen every single joint asset they shared. He was legally locking down the remaining funds to protect himself in the impending divorce. Beatrice dropped the phone onto the carpet. She had no husband. She had no social standing. She had absolutely no money to her name. The shadow credit cards she relied on were entirely maxed out. She was trapped in the sprawling, expensive estate she had bragged about buying, fully aware that she did not own a single brick of it. She stood up and walked down the hallway, her bare feet making no sound on the plush carpet. She found Sienna still lying on the sofa, staring vacantly into space. The two women who had spent their entire lives manipulating and feeding off each other were finally left with nothing but their own toxic reflections. "What are we going to do?" Sienna whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Andre took the remaining cash we had in the safe. He took the car. The eviction notice says we have 29 days left." Beatrice looked out the large living room windows at the ruined patio and the empty black box. Her anger flared again, hot and desperate. "We are not leaving this house," she declared, her voice trembling with delusion. "I will not let Piper win. She is doing this to punish us, but she cannot legally throw her own blood out on the street. She will cave. She always caves when we push her hard enough." Beatrice marched over to the kitchen counter and snatched up her phone. She was about to initiate the final, most desperate phase of their narcissistic cycle. They had tried guilt, they had tried threats, and they had tried public humiliation. Now, with their entire world in ashes, they were going to attempt the one tactic they had never genuinely used before. They were going to beg. I woke up on Saturday morning to the bright California sun streaming through my floor-to-ceiling bedroom windows. The air in my penthouse felt incredibly light and completely untainted by the drama unfolding thousands of miles away. I stretched, swung my legs out of bed, and walked into the kitchen to start the espresso machine. It was a perfectly normal weekend morning for me, but 3 time zones away, the radioactive fallout from the heavy black box was still burning through my hometown. I picked up my phone from the cool marble counter. The screen was completely flooded with notifications. But unlike the previous weekend, there were no aggressive group texts from extended family members. There were no arrogant legal threats from Andre. There were just 3 new voicemails waiting in my inbox. One from my sister, one from my mother, and one from my father. I pressed play on the first message while the dark espresso dripped into my mug. It was Sienna. The audio was thick with heavy, hyperventilating sobs. It sounded like she was curled up on the floor, gasping for air. "Piper, please," she choked out, her voice barely recognizable and stripped of all its usual golden child entitlement. "Andre is gone. He packed a bag and left me last night. Chelsea is not answering her phone. I am entirely alone in this house. You cannot evict me. Where am I supposed to go? I have no job. I have no access to the accounts Andre controlled. I know I was awful to you. I know I said terrible things, but please do not throw me out on the street. I am your sister. You have to let me stay here. I will do whatever you want. I will pay you rent when I find work. Just please call me back." The message ended with a pathetic, broken whimper. I stirred a splash of oat milk into my coffee, completely unmoved by her tears. Sienna was finally experiencing the real world, entirely stripped of her enablers and her stolen wealth. I tapped the screen to play the next voicemail. It was Beatrice. The undisputed queen of the country club sounded exactly like a cornered animal. "Piper, you have to help me right now." My mother gasped, her voice shrill with absolute panic. "Your father froze all our joint bank accounts. I cannot access a single dime. I went to the grocery store this morning and my card was declined in front of the entire neighborhood. Everyone is ignoring my calls. You have to wire me some money immediately. I need to hire a ruthless divorce attorney to destroy him, Piper. He has another family. He has a son. Send me $20,000 right now or I am going to lose my mind. Please, Piper, I am begging you to save me. Even in her absolute darkest hour, my mother somehow managed to demand cash while acting like the ultimate victim. It was a textbook narcissistic response completely devoid of any self-awareness or accountability for her own actions. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor, and moved on to the final voicemail. This one was from Jeffrey. The audio was quiet, accompanied by the faint, steady sound of highway traffic in the background. He must have been calling from his car, likely driving back to his second family. "Piper, it is Dad," he said. His voice was heavy, entirely drained of the fake patriarchal authority he had projected for 30 years. "I am not calling to ask you to fix this mess. I know what you sent to the house. I know you know everything now. I just wanted to say I am deeply sorry. I was a coward. I let your mother treat you terribly because it was easier than fighting her. I hid my real life away because I was too weak to leave. You were the only honest person in that house, and we actively punished you for it. You do not ever have to speak to me again, but I needed to apologize." I set my coffee mug down on the counter and looked out over the sprawling Los Angeles skyline. In the past, hearing my family cry would have triggered a massive wave of guilt and crushing obligation. I would have scrambled to fix their problems, to wire the money to let Sienna stay in the house indefinitely. But standing there in my quiet kitchen, I felt a profound sense of total emotional detachment. I was listening to the voices of strangers. Their pain was entirely of their own making. Andre's infidelity, my father's secret life, my mother's financial ruin, and Sienna's shattered marriage were not my burdens to carry. They had built their own personal hells through decades of lies and toxic entitlement. In my profession, I guide corporate clients through the wreckage of their poor decisions. But these people were not my clients. I was simply the courier who delivered the mirror they were finally forced to look into. The silence in my kitchen was suddenly broken by the sharp, persistent vibration of my phone rattling against the marble countertop. I looked down at the bright screen. It was an incoming FaceTime audio group call. Beatrice had somehow managed to conference Sienna into the line, desperately trying to corner me in a digital ambush before the reality of their situation became permanent. For a brief moment, I considered simply letting it ring out into the void. I had already won the war. I had delivered the absolute truth and watched their fraudulent house of cards completely collapse from a very comfortable distance. But a highly trained crisis manager knows that a volatile situation is never fully resolved until the final terms are explicitly stated and all avenues of further negotiation are permanently closed. I swiped the green icon and accepted the call. I did not say hello. I simply brought the phone to my ear and waited. The line erupted into immediate chaotic noise. Beatrice and Sienna were talking over each other in a frantic, panicked symphony of despair. "Piper, thank God you answered!" Beatrice practically shrieked into the receiver. "Listen to me. You have to undo this right now. You have to call the lawyers and stop the eviction notice. Sienna is a complete wreck. I am entirely broke. We are your family and you are actively destroying us." Sienna's voice cut in, thick and heavy with fresh tears. "Piper, please," she begged. "I do not even know who my real dad is anymore. Andre took all the emergency money from the safe and left me. You cannot sell the house. I have nowhere to go. I will do anything you want me to do. I will be a better sister. Just please do not leave me homeless." I let them ramble for exactly 45 seconds. I listened to the raw desperation, the profound terror of finally facing the brutal consequences of their own actions. When they finally paused to take a breath, entirely expecting me to offer a lifeline and fix their mistakes, I spoke. My voice was not angry. It was not bitter or even triumphant. It was chillingly calm, completely devoid of the emotional static that had defined our toxic relationship for my entire life. Listen to me very carefully, I said, my tone slicing cleanly through the panicked silence on the other end of the line. Because this is the absolute last time you will ever hear my voice. Neither of them made a sound. The sheer cold authority in my words pinned them to the floor. For 33 years, you treated me like an inconvenience. I continued smoothly, pacing slowly across the hardwood floor of my living room. You used me as an emotional punching bag to make yourselves feel superior. You stole my money. You mocked my career. You threw a massive anniversary party in a house I paid for to celebrate a marriage that was completely fake, while actively telling your wealthy friends that I was an insane addict locked away in rehab. You plotted to forge my legal signature and steal my property to fund your pathetic, shallow lives. Piper, we did not mean it, Beatrice sobbed loudly. We were just so stressed. I am speaking! I snapped back, the sharp command echoing in the empty penthouse. You built an entire reality out of lies, and you expected me to finance it indefinitely. But the bank is officially closed. Sienna, you have exactly 29 days left to pack whatever Andre did not steal and vacate my property. If you are still inside that house on day 30, Warren Mitchell will have the county sheriff physically remove you, and you will carry an eviction record for the rest of your life. Mother, you can figure out your own divorce and your own massive credit card debt. You wanted to be a high society matriarch. Now you can experience exactly what happens when the stolen money runs out. A sharp gasp came from the receiver, followed by a quiet, terrified whimper from Sienna. You spent my entire life threatening to cut me off, I said, looking out at the endless blue sky stretching over Los Angeles. You constantly told me I was a disappointment. You wanted me out of your lives, and now you have exactly what you asked for. The house goes on the market Tuesday. Lose my number. I did not wait for a response. I did not want to hear another empty apology, another pathetic excuse, or another fake tear. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, severing the connection instantly. The silence that washed over the apartment was magnificent. It was the sound of absolute freedom. I remained standing by the window and opened the settings on my phone. I went straight to the contacts list. I tapped on Beatrice's name, scrolled to the very bottom of the screen, and selected block caller. I did the exact same for Sienna. I did the same for Jeffrey. I went into the extended family group chat, blocked. Aunt Brenda blocked the furious cousins and permanently deleted the thread. I blocked Andre's cell phone and his law firm email address. I built a massive, impenetrable digital wall around my life brick by brick, ensuring that none of their toxicity could ever reach me again. I set the phone down on the glass table and walked back into the kitchen. My espresso was still warm. I picked up the mug, took a deep breath of the fresh California air, and smiled. The crisis was officially managed. My life was finally completely my own. 6 months later, I found myself sitting in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Los Angeles, holding a heavy gold pen. Across the polished mahogany table sat my real estate attorney and an escrow officer. I signed my name on the final line of the towering stack of closing documents. The escrow officer smiled, stamped the paperwork, and extended her hand to congratulate me. The Connecticut estate was officially sold. The irony was almost poetic. Andre had been absolutely right about one thing during his drunken voicemail rant. The East Coast real estate market was incredibly hot. The house had sparked a massive bidding war the very first weekend it was listed. It sold for significantly over the asking price, entirely in cash, to a wealthy tech executive relocating from Manhattan. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, my phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. I opened it to see the final wire transfer had officially cleared. The enormous profit margin instantly doubled my net worth. The financial anchor I had dragged around for 4 years had finally been converted into pure liquid freedom. The estate was gone, and so was the toxic family unit that had infected it. In the 6 months since the anniversary party, my lawyer Warren Mitchell had kept me briefly updated on the absolute wreckage they left behind. Sienna had actually tried to squat in the house, but Warren executed the eviction with ruthless precision. She was escorted off the property by county sheriffs on day 30. Completely abandoned by Andre and utterly broke, the former golden child was now living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment working a retail job just to survive. Andre had not fared any better. The senior partners at his law firm fired him the Monday morning following the party. His arrogant plan to open a private practice died instantly when his reputation was vaporized in the local legal community. He was currently facing a formal investigation by the State Bar Association for his attempted real estate fraud, an inquiry I had happily provided all the necessary documentation for. As for my parents, the explosion was completely permanent. Beatrice and Jeffrey were locked in a vicious, highly public divorce that was draining whatever pathetic remnants of cash they still possessed. Jeffrey had moved in with Sylvia and his biological son, completely washing his hands of his previous life. Beatrice, shunned entirely by the country club elite who had witnessed her humiliation, was forced to rent a tiny townhouse 2 towns over. The absolute best part of it all was that none of them were speaking to each other. The foundation of lies that held them together had completely shattered, leaving them isolated in their own individual misery. They had spent years trying to break me, but in the end, they had entirely destroyed themselves. I stepped out of the office building and into the warm Southern California afternoon, breathing in the fresh air. I drove back to my penthouse, not to sit in quiet isolation, but to prepare for a celebration. Tonight I was hosting a dinner party. By 8 o'clock, my living room was filled with the sound of genuine, unfiltered laughter. The dining table was covered in platters of roasted lamb, fresh salads, and expensive bottles of wine. But the most beautiful part of the evening was the people sitting around the table. Marcus, my forensic accountant, was passionately debating movie trivia with Elena, my private investigator. 2 of my closest colleagues from the crisis management firm were sharing stories about our most ridiculous corporate clients. My closest friends, the people who had supported me through late nights and stressful campaigns, were all gathered together. This was my chosen family. There was no emotional blackmail here. There were no hidden agendas, no secret credit cards, and no desperate attempts to project a fake reality. We were bound together by mutual respect, genuine affection, and actual trust. I looked down the length of the table, listening to the joyful noise echoing off the glass windows. I thought about the heavy black box I had sent 6 months ago and the incredible weight it had lifted from my shoulders. For decades, I was conditioned to believe that blood was an unbreakable contract, a mandatory sentence to endure abuse, just because we shared a last name. But standing in my beautiful home, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me, I knew the absolute truth. Walking away is not a sign of weakness, it is the ultimate victory. Refusing to participate in a toxic dynamic is the most powerful move you can ever make. I raised my glass of wine, the deep red liquid catching the ambient light, and silently toasted to the beautiful, unbothered peace of a life finally lived on my own terms.